Case 1. Malikah Bennett, August 2020, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. There are moments in a community's history that refuse to be forgotten. Moments so devastating, so incomprehensible, that they permanently alter the way an entire city thinks about the word home. In the summer of 2020, in a quiet residential neighborhood tucked inside Northwest Charlotte, something unspeakable was happening behind closed doors. No one on the outside could see it. No one on the outside could hear it. And for months, long, silent, unbearable months, no one came to stop it. By the time the world finally learned what had happened inside that house on Braden Drive, it was far too late for a little girl who had done nothing wrong except trust the one person who was supposed to love her most. Her name was Megalik Young. Her family called her Jelly. She was 4 years old. Jelly was, by every account from those who knew her, a child full of life. She loved having her hair done. She liked to look pretty. She talked constantly about her daddy. She was the kind of little girl who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone in it smile. She had cousins who adored her, family members who cherished every memory they made with her, and a whole future spread out ahead of her. A future that should have included school and birthdays and growing up and becoming whoever she was going to become. None of that would happen, because the person responsible for keeping Jelly safe was the same person who would take everything from her. Malikah Bennett was Jelly's mother. By the summer of 2020, the two of them were living together with other family members in a home on Braden Drive in the University City area of Charlotte. Also in that home was Jelly's older sister, a 13-year-old girl who would eventually become the primary witness to one of the most heartbreaking cases Charlotte had ever seen. Investigators would later piece together what happened through that older daughter's account. A testimony so detailed, so devastating, that the detectives who heard it described the case as one of the most deeply troubling of their careers. According to the account documented in search warrants, Malikah Bennett had developed a pattern of subjecting little Jelly to extreme forms of punishment. The child would be physically handled with force, thrown against walls, struck without mercy. She was punished in ways that went far beyond any reasonable understanding of discipline. And when Jelly had an accident, when the 4-year-old soiled herself, as small children do, her mother decided that the appropriate response was something no child should ever be forced to endure. Bennett reportedly forced Jelly to stand inside the laundry room. Not for an hour, not for an afternoon, for 3 full days. The child was not permitted to sit down. She was not permitted to rest. She could not leave. For 3 days, while the rest of the household continued around her, a 4-year-old little girl stood in a laundry room as a form of punishment, her small body slowly giving out beneath the weight of what was being done to her. On the 3rd day, Jelly's body reached its limit. She passed out. She fell. She struck her head on the way down, collapsing through the back of the laundry room door. According to the account provided to investigators, Bennett attempted to perform emergency response measures on the child. But it was too late. Jelly did not recover. And what happened next revealed something perhaps even more chilling than the act itself. Rather than call for help, rather than reach for a phone, dial emergency services, or do anything that might have documented what had happened, Malikah Bennett chose a different path. She chose concealment. Jelly's small body was placed inside black plastic bags. Those bags were put into the back of an SUV. And there, in that vehicle, the child remained for approximately 5 days while her mother went about her daily life. When Bennett finally decided to act, the choice she made was not to seek accountability. It was to erase the evidence. She reportedly drove to purchase a shovel. And then, in what stands as one of the most harrowing details of this entire case, she instructed her 13-year-old daughter to help her. That child, who had already witnessed the unthinkable, was directed to help carry her little sister's remains, place them into the ground, and cover them over with dirt in the backyard of the family home. Jelly was buried in a shallow grave behind the house where she had lived. She was 4 years old, and no one reported her missing for months. It was not until May of 2021, nearly a full year after Jelly's passing, that the outside world finally learned something was wrong. Investigators, acting on information gathered during the course of a separate inquiry, arrived at the Braden Drive property and began searching the backyard. What they found confirmed what the older daughter had already told them. Megalik, Jelly, Young was recovered from that shallow grave. Her remains, according to the medical examiner, showed evidence of malnutrition and extended abuse. The cause of death could not be definitively determined given the advanced state of her remains, but investigators had more than enough information to understand what had happened. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department Lieutenant Brian Crum, speaking at a press conference following the arrest, did not mince words. "This case is deeply disturbing," he said. "It's disturbing to everyone who's worked it. Crime scene investigators, detectives, everyone involved. Many of us are parents, and it is very difficult to understand how someone could do this to their child." Malikah Bennett was arrested in May of 2021. She was initially charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse inflicting serious injury, and felony concealment of a death. Jelly's grandmother, Tammy Taylor Moffitt, was also arrested and charged with concealing a death and accessory after the fact, accused of having knowledge of what had happened and doing nothing to expose it. The legal process that followed was long. In December of 2021, prosecutors announced they would not pursue the death penalty against Bennett. Plea negotiations continued over the months that followed, and in July of 2023, 3 years after Jelly's passing, Malikah Bennett appeared in a Mecklenburg County courtroom and entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder. The remaining charges were dropped as part of the agreement. The judge sentenced her to between 300 and 372 months in state prison, the equivalent of approximately 25 to 31 years. The judge also ordered that Bennett receive psychological counseling during her incarceration. For Jelly's family, no sentence could ever feel sufficient. Jelly's aunt, Shanique Wade, stood before the court and delivered words that captured what so many were feeling. "She deserved 100 years, or life without parole," Wade said. "The day she gets out, you need to be old and gray, or in the grave yourself." Another family member reflected on the bitter injustice of a child's future being erased while the person responsible would one day walk free. "My niece was robbed of her time," Wade said. "So why do you even get a chance to walk out the doors again?" Jelly's cousins remembered her as a girl who loved lip gloss and getting her hair done. A girl who was smart, who was loved, who talked about her daddy. A girl who deserved so much more than what she got. Megalik, Jelly, Young was 4 years old when she passed. She deserved protection. She deserved advocacy. She deserved a childhood. What happened to her stands as a reminder of why child welfare oversight, community awareness, and the courage to speak up when something feels wrong are not just important. They are life-saving. If you see something that concerns you about a child's safety in your community, contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Trained crisis counselors are available 24 hours a day. Jelly's story will not be forgotten. Her name will not be erased. And the justice secured in that Mecklenburg County courtroom, however incomplete it may feel, is a testament to the investigators, prosecutors, and family members who refused to let this little girl disappear without accountability. If this case moved you, if it reminded you why stories like this matter, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every like, every subscriber, every share helps us keep telling the stories that the world needs to hear. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Case 2, Launice Shanique Battle, August 27, 2022, Wake County, Cary, and Raleigh, North Carolina. There are tragedies that happen in an instant, sudden, shocking, impossible to predict. And then there are tragedies that unfold over hours, slowly and completely preventably, while the person responsible makes a deliberate choice to stay away. What happened to Trinity Milbourne and Amora Milbourne on August 27, 2022 belongs to the second category. These were not children who were impossible to reach. They were not children whose distress was unknowable. They were two little girls, 2-year-old Trinity and 3-year-old Amora, who were left in a locked vehicle in the middle of a North Carolina summer, in temperatures that climbed to 95 degrees for more than 6 hours. And they were left there not by accident, not by a momentary lapse in judgment, but while their mother sat inside a nearby building and made a conscious choice, hour after hour, not to return to them. Launice Shanique Battle was the girl's mother. On the morning of that summer day, she drove her 2 daughters to a sweepstakes gaming venue in the Raleigh area, a type of establishment designed specifically to keep its patrons engaged and inside for as long as possible. She entered. She left the children in the car. And she stayed. What was happening inside that vehicle during those 6 hours is almost impossible to hold in the mind for long. In a closed automobile in 95-degree summer heat, internal temperatures can escalate to well above 130 degrees within an hour. The human body, particularly a small child's body, cannot survive that environment for long. Trinity and Amora would have experienced extreme distress. Their small systems would have struggled against the heat in every way they could, and there was no one coming to help them. When Launice Battle finally returned to her vehicle more than 6 hours after she left, she found her daughters in critical condition. She drove them herself to the Duke Raleigh Hospital emergency room. Both Trinity and Amora were pronounced gone upon arrival. The medical examiner determined that both children had lost their lives due to hyperthermia, the catastrophic overheating of the body that occurs when a human being is trapped in extreme heat with no means of escape and no access to water. Trinity Milbourne was 2 years old. Amora Milbourne was 3 years old. They were sisters. They were left alone, and they did not survive. Law enforcement investigation into what happened that day was swift and thorough. The timeline was not in dispute. Security footage from the venue confirmed how long Battle had been inside. The condition of the vehicle and the condition of the children told the rest of the story clearly. Launice Shanique Battle was arrested and charged in connection with the passing of both of her daughters. She ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. The case drew widespread attention across North Carolina and beyond, not only because of the devastating nature of what had happened to 2 small children, but because it raised difficult and necessary questions about child safety, about the responsibilities of caregivers, and about what happens when the adults in a child's life fail them in the most fundamental way possible. Trinity and Amora deserved a summer afternoon. They deserved the windows rolled down and the radio playing and the kind of ordinary childhood afternoon that most children take for granted. They deserved to grow up. They deserved everything that was taken from them in the back of that car while their mother chose to stay inside. The Wake County justice system moved to hold Launice Battle fully accountable for what she chose to do that day. And in the guilty plea that followed, accountability, however painful, however incomplete, was established for 2 little girls who had no voice of their own. In the summer months, child safety advocates nationwide remind parents and caregivers that no child should ever be left unattended in a vehicle, even for a short period of time. Temperatures inside parked cars can become life-threatening within minutes. If you see a child alone in a vehicle in distress, call 911 immediately. Trinity and Amora Milbourne were loved. They were daughters, and they were sisters, and they were gone far too soon. Their story is one that the community of North Carolina has not forgotten, and one that advocates continue to reference as a reminder of what is at stake every single time a child is left without protection. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. If this story matters to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps this channel going and keeps these victims' stories alive. Hit that subscribe button right now. Case 3, Brionce Parks, December 26, 2025, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. Christmas had just ended. The decorations were still up. The city of Charlotte was in that quiet, unhurried space between the holiday and the new year, the kind of stillness that makes December 26th feel like a pause between worlds. For most families, it was a time of leftovers and movies and the unwrapping of the last few gifts. It was the day after. For 1-year-old Camila Doris Michelina, December 26th, 2025, was the last day of her life. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the early morning hours, less than 90 minutes after Christmas Day had given way to the 26th, officers with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department received an emergency call and responded to the Studios and Suites 4 Less Motel on Queen City Drive in West Charlotte. When they entered the motel room, they found Camila, just 1 year old, completely unresponsive and not breathing. Emergency responders worked to stabilize the infant and transported her immediately to a local hospital. But the damage done to her tiny system was already complete. Camila Doris Michelina was pronounced gone at the hospital. She was 12 months old. The investigation that followed moved quickly. Detectives from the CMPD Homicide Unit responded to both the hospital and the motel room to conduct a thorough examination of the scene. What they found inside that room told a story that was impossible to interpret in any way other than the truth of what had happened to this child. Evidence of illicit substances, specifically crack cocaine and fentanyl, was recovered from the room. An arrest warrant later reviewed by multiple credible media outlets confirmed that Camila had been exposed to both substances, and that this exposure directly contributed to her passing. A guest at the motel, who told investigators she was familiar with the family, indicated to authorities that the death appeared to be the result of an overdose. Camila's mother, 26-year-old Brionce Parks, was interviewed by homicide detectives at police headquarters on the day of the incident. Parks provided statements during that interview that investigators say led directly to charges being filed against her. She was arrested on December 26, 2025, and charged with felony child abuse and exposing a child to a controlled substance. She was taken into custody at the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office and held on a $1 million bond. In the days that followed, additional information emerged about the circumstances of Camila's passing. According to an affidavit filed in the case, Parks told investigators that an acquaintance had come to the motel room and used crack cocaine in close proximity to the infant. The child was reportedly only a matter of feet away during this incident. An arrest warrant confirmed that Camila had been exposed to cocaine and fentanyl, and that this exposure was the cause of her death. What the investigation established was not ambiguous. A 1-year-old child, incapable of removing herself from a dangerous environment, incapable of calling for help, incapable of understanding what was happening around her, was in a motel room on the night after Christmas where illicit substances were present. She did not survive the night. Camila Doris Michelina never had the chance to take her first real steps through the world. She never had the chance to form a sentence, or go to school, or hear her own name called at a birthday party with candles on a cake. She was 1 year old, and she was gone, and the investigation determined that her passing was entirely preventable. Brionce Parks faced the consequences of her choices in a Mecklenburg County courtroom. The charges against her, felony child abuse and exposure of a child to a controlled substance, carry serious penalties under North Carolina law. As of the time this documentary was produced, the legal proceedings in this case were ongoing. Child safety advocates who work with families struggling with substance dependency consistently emphasize that help is available, that resources exist, and that no parent is beyond the reach of support if they choose to seek it. The National Parent Helpline can be reached at 1-800-840-8772. If a child in your life is in an unsafe environment, please contact local Child Protective Services or call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. Camila Doris Michelina was 1 year old. She deserved the protection that every child is owed from the moment they enter the world. She deserved the chance to grow up. Her story is one that Charlotte has not forgotten, and one that advocates continue to hold up as a reminder of the profound responsibility that comes with caring for a child. If this story stayed with you, if Camila's name is one you want to carry forward, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscriber matters. Every share matters. Hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you're notified every time we release a new episode. Case 4. Danaysha Alexandra Booker, November 4, 2025, Caldwell County, Hudson, North Carolina. There is a kind of harm that does not require a direct hand. There is a kind of harm that is carried out through decisions, through the choices a caregiver makes about who they allow into a child's life, whose word they trust, whose safety they prioritize, and what they do when the moment comes to tell the truth or look away. What happened to 4-year-old Kingston Liam Greer in November of 2025 was not simply the result of one person's violence. It was the result of a chain of choices made by his mother, Danaysha Alexandra Booker, that placed her son directly in the path of danger, and then compounded that danger by prioritizing the protection of another adult over the life of her child. Kingston was 4 years old. He was his mother's son. And on November 4, 2025, in the small community of Hudson in Caldwell County, North Carolina, he was left in the care of a man named Thomas Lee Bryant, Booker's boyfriend, while his mother was away. What made this decision not simply negligent, but criminally significant was a fact that Danaysha Booker already knew before she ever made it. Thomas Lee Bryant was legally prohibited from having contact with Kingston Liam Greer. A prior child abuse arrest had resulted in a court order specifically barring Bryant from being around the boy. That order existed for a reason. It existed because the legal system had already identified Bryant as a potential source of harm to this specific child. Booker knew about the order. She arranged the situation anyway. What Thomas Lee Bryant did to Kingston during the time he was left in his care resulted in injuries that shocked the medical professionals who treated the child. Internal injuries of a severity that indicated a violent assault had occurred against this 4-year-old boy. Kingston was transported for emergency medical care, but his injuries were beyond what could be repaired. He did not survive. When law enforcement arrived and began to investigate what had happened, they encountered an immediate obstacle. Danaysha Alexandra Booker was not telling the truth. According to investigators, Booker deliberately provided false information to officers in an effort to conceal Thomas Lee Bryant's presence at the home on the day of the incident. She did not simply withhold information. She actively constructed a false account designed to redirect the investigation away from the man who had harmed her son. And in doing so, she directly delayed the ability of investigators to piece together what had actually happened, a delay with consequences that extended beyond justice and into the hours in which Kingston was fighting for his life. Booker was arrested and charged with felony child abuse. Bryant faced his own separate serious criminal charges in connection with the direct harm done to the child. The Caldwell County case against Danaysha Alexandra Booker raised questions that resonate far beyond a single community. At what point does a parent's obligation to protect a child supersede their loyalty to a partner? What responsibility do caregivers carry when they knowingly place a child in harm's way? And what message does the law send to those who choose concealment over the safety of the most vulnerable people in their care? For Kingston Liam Greer, those questions arrived too late. He was 4 years old. He was someone's son. He was a little boy who deserved a safe home and a future, and he received neither. Child advocates working in communities across North Carolina consistently emphasize that court protection orders exist to protect children, and that violations of those orders are not only illegal but life-threatening. If you are aware that a child in your community is living in an unsafe situation, you are encouraged to contact the North Carolina Department of Social Services Child Protective Services reporting line or call the Child Help Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Kingston Liam Greer deserved better. His story demands that we ask harder questions, hold higher standards, and never allow the protection of adults to come at the cost of a child's life. If Kingston's story moved you, if you believe every child deserves a voice, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. We tell these stories because they matter. We tell them because the children at the center of them deserve to be remembered. Hit that subscribe button and help us keep going. Case 5. Andrea Morgan Faust, February 12, 2026, Durham County, Durham, North Carolina. February of 2026 brought one of the most devastating and complex cases North Carolina had seen in years. A case that raised not only questions of accountability, but deeply difficult questions about mental health, the failures of systems meant to protect children, and what happens when tragedy intersects with a mind in profound crisis. On February 12, 2026, authorities in Durham, North Carolina, responded to a residence on Chartwell Court following a welfare call. What they found inside that home defied comprehension. 2 young boys, both of them Andrea Morgan Faust's sons, were discovered unresponsive inside the residence. Emergency responders worked to stabilize both children. One of the boys ultimately did not survive his injuries. The other survived, but had endured serious harm. The investigation that followed led to charges of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder against 34-year-old Andrea Morgan Faust. The community around Chartwell Court was left shaken. Neighbors struggled to reconcile what investigators described with the woman they thought they knew. The boys, whose names have been treated with care by local advocacy groups in recognition of their youth and the privacy of surviving family members, had been, by all outward appearances, children living in an ordinary home. What had happened inside that home, and why, became the central question of an investigation that would grow increasingly complex in the weeks that followed. In March of 2026, with Faust in custody at the Durham County Jail, a crisis occurred that shifted the trajectory of the legal proceedings entirely. Faust suffered what was described as a severe self-harm episode while incarcerated. The incident was serious enough to require immediate medical attention and prompted a full judicial review of her mental fitness to stand trial. A special Superior Court judge, reviewing the findings of mental health evaluations conducted in the aftermath of the episode, determined that Andrea Morgan Faust was, at that time, mentally incompetent to stand trial. Under North Carolina law, a defendant who cannot understand the nature of the proceedings against them or who cannot meaningfully assist in their own defense cannot be required to face trial until competency is restored. The judge ordered Faust to be placed under involuntary commitment at Central Regional Hospital, a state psychiatric facility, where she would receive evaluation and treatment. The legal proceedings against her were suspended pending the restoration of competency. This outcome, as legally appropriate as it was, left the family members of the child who did not survive in an extraordinarily painful position. They had lost a son. They were waiting for justice. And now the process by which that justice might be delivered was paused, with no clear timeline for when it might resume. The case of Andrea Morgan Faust sits at an uncomfortable intersection, one that the criminal justice system has grappled with for generations. Mental health and criminal accountability are not mutually exclusive. A person can be experiencing profound psychological crisis and still bear legal responsibility for harm done to others. But the law also recognizes that a fair trial requires a defendant capable of participating in it. The tension between these realities produces outcomes that often feel deeply unsatisfying to the families of victims. Mental health professionals who have commented on cases involving parental harm to children frequently note that access to adequate mental health services, before a crisis reaches its most catastrophic point, is among the most important factors in preventing tragedies of this kind. When warning signs go unaddressed, when support systems fail, when individuals in severe psychological distress have no meaningful pathway to care, the consequences can fall on those least able to protect themselves. For the surviving child, for the family left to grieve, and for a Durham community still working to understand what happened on Chartwell Court, the case of Andrea Morgan Faust remains an open wound, one that cannot be closed until the full weight of the law is brought to bear and the question of accountability is answered. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please reach out to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988. Help is available, and reaching out is not a sign of weakness. It is the most courageous thing a person in crisis can do. The boys at the center of this case deserved safety. They deserved the full protection of every adult in their lives. And they deserved a world in which the adults responsible for them had access to the help they needed before harm became irreversible. If this story affected you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These cases are difficult. They are heartbreaking. But they are real, and the people at the center of them deserve to have their stories told with honesty and care. Subscribe now and help us continue this work. Case 6. Raja Drain, December 2, 2024, Bertie County, Lewiston, Woodville, North Carolina. In the world of child protective services, few decisions carry more weight or more risk than the decision to return a child to a home from which they were previously removed. The system that governs those decisions is designed with layers of oversight, assessment, and accountability. Caseworkers evaluate. Supervisors review. Judges sign off. The process is meant to ensure that when a child goes back, they're going back to safety. In December of 2024, in the small community of Lewiston Woodville in Bertie County, North Carolina, that process failed catastrophically. And a 2-year-old girl named Jamie Drain did not survive the failure. Jamie had been the subject of a prior Department of Social Services intervention. At some point before her passing, the system had identified concerns serious enough to remove her from the home, and then, following whatever review process was applied, had determined that she could be returned to her mother's care. Her mother was Raja Drain. On December 2, 2024, just days after being returned to her mother's custody, Jamie Drain suffered catastrophic head injuries. She did not survive. She was 2 years old. When law enforcement arrived and began to investigate the circumstances surrounding Jamie's injuries, Raja Drain offered an explanation. The child, she said, had fallen in the kitchen. A simple fall. An accident. The medical examiner's autopsy findings told a completely different story. The injuries sustained by 2-year-old Jamie Drain were not consistent with a fall. They were not consistent with an accident. The severity, the nature, and the pattern of what was found were inconsistent in every measurable way with the explanation her mother had provided. What the autopsy revealed instead was evidence of severe physical harm inflicted with force, the kind of harm that no accidental fall could produce in a 2-year-old child. The gap between what Raja Drain said happened and what the forensic evidence proved had happened was not a matter of ambiguity. It was a matter of deliberate, demonstrable deception. Law enforcement initiated a full homicide investigation. A grand jury, presented with the evidence gathered by investigators, returned an indictment for first-degree murder against Raja Drain. And then Raja Drain disappeared. Having learned of the grand jury's action against her, Drain fled the state of North Carolina entirely. She crossed state lines and made her way north, eventually being located in the town of Wethersfield, in the state of Connecticut. Investigators from North Carolina coordinated with Connecticut authorities and tracked her down as a fugitive. She was arrested in September of 2025, 9 months after her daughter's passing, and was returned to face the charges against her in North Carolina. The flight from justice added another dimension to a case already marked by tragedy and betrayal. A mother who had allegedly harmed her own child, then lied to the investigators working to understand what happened, and then ran, leaving her daughter's case in the hands of a system she was actively trying to evade. Jamie Drain was 2 years old. She had been removed from her home once already, a sign that the system had, at some point, identified that something was wrong. The system then decided to return her, and within days of that return, she was gone. The case prompted difficult questions about the oversight mechanisms governing child placement decisions in North Carolina, and about what tools are available to social services professionals when they are evaluating the safety of a home before returning a child to it. Advocates for child welfare reform have consistently called for greater transparency, more rigorous review, and stronger follow-up protocols in the period immediately following a child's return to a home where concerns were previously documented. None of those reforms, however urgently needed, could bring Jamie back. Jamie Drain deserved protection. She deserved the full weight of every safeguard the system had to offer. And she deserved a world in which the adults responsible for her, including the system itself, took the full measure of their responsibility seriously enough to protect her. Raja Drain faces first-degree murder charges in Bertie County, North Carolina. The legal proceedings in this case were ongoing at the time this documentary was produced. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that children like Jamie deserve justice and advocacy, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every time you engage with this content, you help us reach more people, and more people means more awareness, and more awareness saves lives. Please subscribe right now. Case 7. Raeonna Allen Watson, January 28, 2019, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. The call came in at 4:55 in the morning. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department officers, responding to a request for emergency medical assistance, arrived at a home on Galena View Drive in North Charlotte in the early hours of January 28, 2019. The Charlotte Fire Department and paramedics were already on scene, working urgently on an infant who had been found completely unresponsive inside the home. The infant was 7 months old. Her name was Jade Williams. Every available measure was taken to sustain Jade's life. Paramedics worked on her with focused urgency and transported her to Atrium Health, the regional medical center equipped to provide the highest level of care. But by the time the full picture emerged, by the time Jade arrived at the hospital and the medical team had the chance to fully assess what had happened to her, it was already too late. Jade Williams was pronounced gone at Atrium Health. She was 7 months old. She had barely had the chance to know the world. 7 months is an age of firsts, first smiles, first sounds, first attempts to reach toward things and people and light. 7 months is before the first birthday, before the first words, before a child has had the chance to build even the earliest memories of being alive. Jade Williams never made it past that threshold. CMPD homicide detectives were notified and responded to both the hospital and the Galena View Drive home to begin the dual-track investigation that these circumstances require. Crime scene investigators examined the residence. Medical professionals at the hospital provided information about what they observed during their assessment of the child. And Jade's mother, 20-year-old Raeonna Allen Watson, was transported to CMPD headquarters to be interviewed by detectives. The interview did not go in her favor. According to police, the information and evidence gathered during that interview combined with what investigators discovered at the hospital and at the residence, led directly to the decision to charge Raeonna Allen Watson with the murder of her daughter. Watson was transferred to the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. The following day, she appeared before a judge and was denied bond. She was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the passing of Jade Williams. The cause of Jade's injuries was not immediately made public by law enforcement. Police at the time declined to specify what had caused the infant's condition, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. What was clear, however, was that investigators had gathered sufficient evidence, within hours of the emergency call, to determine that Jade's death was not an accident, and that the person responsible was the child's own mother. For the neighbors on Galena View Drive, the news was incomprehensible. A man who lived near the family expressed the sentiment that many felt. Who would expect somebody to murder their kid? Another neighbor, who had crossed paths with the family in the months since they moved to the area, said he simply could not find a framework for understanding it. You never know what goes on behind closed doors, he said. Watson's own mother was present in the courtroom for her daughter's first appearance before a judge. When she saw Raeonna, the older woman reportedly cried out and had to be attended to by medical personnel, a moment that underscored the rippling devastation that these cases send through entire family networks, not just the immediate victims. The legal proceedings in the case extended over several years. Raeonna Allen Watson did not ultimately stand trial on the first-degree murder charge. Instead, the case concluded with a plea agreement in which she pleaded guilty to felony child abuse. The murder charge was dismissed. She was sentenced to 143 months in prison, approximately 12 years, with credit given for the time she had already served while awaiting trial. For those who had followed the case and advocated for Jade, the outcome was painful. The charge reduction and the sentence, while representing a legal resolution, did not feel commensurate with the life that had been taken. Jade Williams, a 7-month-old infant, had no means of protecting herself, no way of calling for help, no voice to describe what was happening to her. She relied entirely on the adults in her world to keep her safe. That protection never came. Raeonna Allen Watson was released from custody following the completion of her sentence. The case of Jade Williams, however, has never been forgotten by those in the Charlotte community who followed it from that pre-dawn morning in January of 2019. Infant loss advocates and child welfare professionals consistently emphasize that new parents facing extreme stress, mental health challenges, or crisis situations have access to resources specifically designed to provide support before a situation reaches its breaking point. The National Parent Helpline is available at 1-800-840-8772, and postpartum support resources can be found through Postpartum Support International at postpartum.net. Jade Williams deserved to grow up. She deserved her first birthday. She deserved to be someone in this world. Her brief 7 months of life mattered, and her story, as painful as it is one that this community will not allow to be forgotten. If Jade's story stayed with you, if you believe that every infant life matters, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support means everything to this channel and to the mission of keeping these stories alive. Hit that subscribe button right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Case 8, Tonya McKnight, December 16, 2025, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. There are cases that, when the full scope of them comes into view, make it nearly impossible to speak. This is one of those cases. 6-year-old Dominique Moody should have been preparing for her 7th birthday. She should have been one of 5 children living together in a home on Gwynn Hill Road in East Charlotte, figuring out the world the way 6-year-olds do, through play and questions, and the small daily discoveries that make up a childhood. She should have been protected. She should have been fed. She should have been warm. None of that was what Dominique Moody's life looked like. On the morning of December 16, 2025, first responders received an emergency call reporting that a child at the Gwynn Hill Road residence was not breathing. Officers and paramedics arrived to find Dominique completely unresponsive. Desperate to try to revive her, the other children in the home had reportedly placed her in front of the kitchen stove, one of the only sources of heat in the house, in an attempt to warm her and bring her back. The image of young children doing what they could with the only knowledge available to them, in a home with no working heat in December, is one that investigators say they have not been able to set aside. Dominique was transported to a hospital. She did not survive. She passed away less than 2 hours after responders arrived. She was 6 years old, and she weighed 27 pounds, a weight that, for a child her age, reflects a level of severe malnutrition that medical professionals described as beyond what they typically encounter even in the most serious cases they see. What investigators found when they began examining the circumstances of Dominique Moody's life inside that home was a picture of sustained harm so extensive and so prolonged that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department described the residence as a location where this child had been subjected to conditions that no child should ever face. The home itself was documented in court records as severely neglected, a place where human and animal waste was present throughout multiple rooms, where there was no functioning central heating, and where investigators documented an infestation of rodents and insects. 5 children were living in those conditions. One of them was Dominique. But Dominique's circumstances were uniquely and specifically targeted. According to court documents and affidavits reviewed by multiple credible news organizations, Dominique had been subjected to a specific, systematic pattern of mistreatment under the direction of Tonya McKnight, the 51-year-old woman who served as her legal guardian and who was later confirmed by investigators to be her grandmother. Tonya's 22-year-old daughter, Raeonna McKnight, also lived in the home. A third adult, 61-year-old Susan Robinson, described as a close family friend, was also present. According to evidence gathered by investigators, Dominique was regularly denied food while the other individuals in the household ate. She was forced to watch others eat while she went without. She was not fed every day. In the final year and a half of her life, she was allegedly subjected to conditions of confinement that included being bound with black duct tape, a detail confirmed by a photograph recovered from one of the suspect's mobile phones, which showed Dominique restrained in that manner in the living room of the home. Her hands and feet were described as visibly affected by this treatment. For a period of time, Dominique was forced to remain inside a dog crate in the living room. When she eventually broke through the crate, she was then made to sleep on the floor of the bathroom, a bathroom that investigators described as covered in waste. She was made to wear soiled clothing for extended periods. She was struck with a belt. She was restrained with materials that left marks investigators documented on her body. When the medical examiner conducted a full examination, what was found on Dominique's small body told the story of what had been done to her over an extended period of time. Healed marks indicating she had been restrained around her ankle. Healed scarring across her arm. Burns. Open wounds. The examiner noted that open wounds and evidence of prior injuries in various stages of healing covered most of her body. She weighed 27 pounds, when the typical weight for a child her age is approximately 45 pounds. Tonya McKnight, Raeonna McKnight, and Susan Robinson were all arrested in the weeks following Dominique's passing. Initially charged with felony child abuse, the case was escalated significantly in February of 2026 when prosecutors presented the full scope of the evidence to a grand jury. All 3 women were indicted on charges of first-degree murder. In the courtroom, as prosecutors detailed what had been done to Dominique Moody, all 3 defendants stood stone-faced. Outside the courthouse, Dominique's birth mother, Malikah McKnight, spoke with raw anguish about the daughter she had lost. "She was a beautiful, smart baby," Malikah said. "My baby was very lovable. All the memories I have of my baby, I'm not going to be able to touch or feel my baby anymore." She expressed the full weight of her grief and her fury. "They could rot in hell," she said. "They took something living away from me." Police records that emerged in the weeks following the arrest revealed that officers had been called to the Gwynn Hill Road residence nearly 50 times prior to Dominique's passing. 50 calls to a home where a 6-year-old child was being systematically denied food, confined, restrained, and harmed, and yet the child remained inside. The case prompted an investigation by the North Carolina State House Select Committee on Oversight and Reform, which formally requested all CMPD and Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services records related to Dominique's case. Nationally recognized civil rights attorney Ben Crump joined Dominique's family in publicly calling for full accountability from both state and local agencies. The case also prompted a legislative response at the state level, with North Carolina lawmakers examining what changes might be needed to child welfare oversight protocols to prevent a situation like Dominique's from being missed for as long as it was. The home connected to the case was later destroyed by fire. The fire remains under investigation as a possible arson. As of the time this documentary was produced, Tonya McKnight, Raeonna McKnight, and Susan Robinson were facing first-degree murder charges in Mecklenburg County. The legal proceedings were ongoing. Dominique Moody deserved every protection the law, the system, and the adults in her life were supposed to provide. She deserved warmth in December. She deserved food at the table. She deserved to turn 7. The weight of what was done to her, and the weight of every missed opportunity to stop it, is one that Charlotte and North Carolina will carry for a long time. If you know of a child in your community who may be in an unsafe environment, please do not wait. Contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. You can report anonymously. A single call can change the outcome. Dominique Moody was 6 years old. She had a name. She had a mother who loved her. She had a life that was taken from her, not in a moment, but over months and years, in the very home that was supposed to keep her safe. Her name will not be forgotten. Please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. If Dominique's story moved you, share this video. Make sure her name reaches people who need to hear it. Hit that subscribe button and help us keep telling the stories that matter. Every single one of them matters. Case 9. Avantae Deven uncovered June 2024, Cumberland County, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Some cases are crimes of a moment. Some are crimes of a season. And some, the rarest and most chilling kind, are crimes of years. Crimes that unfold slowly, methodically, behind closed doors, sustained across months and years while the world moves on outside and has no idea that something irreversible is happening within. The case of Avantae Deven is a crime of years. Avantae Emerald Deven, 63 years old at the time of her arrest, was a resident of Fayetteville, North Carolina, in Cumberland County. She was, according to official records, a mother of adopted children, a woman who had navigated the legal system of child adoption multiple times, receiving children from the state's foster care infrastructure and, in doing so, taking on the full legal and moral responsibility of their care. Among her adopted children were a boy named Blake Deven and a young woman named London Deven. Both had been legally adopted by Avantae through the North Carolina adoption system. Blake through a process finalized in 2013, London through an adoption finalized in Buncombe County in 2011. They would both lose their lives in her care. The full scope of what happened to Blake and London Deven did not come to light at once. It emerged piece by piece, the way these things often do, through a concerned family member, a welfare check, an investigation that slowly revealed what years of silence had concealed. In November of 2023, officers with the Fayetteville Police Department responded to a mental health call at Avantae Deven's home. The caller was a person who identified themselves as Blake Deven's sibling. The caller had not seen Blake in at least 5 years. The caller reported that the last time he had seen his brother, Blake had a broken arm. That call opened an investigation that would take months to fully develop and would ultimately reveal a level of harm that shocked even veteran investigators. As officers began looking into Blake Deven's whereabouts, they encountered stonewalling and misdirection. Avantae Deven eventually reported Blake as a runaway in January of 2024, a claim that investigators viewed with deep skepticism given the timeline and the circumstances. The FBI became involved. Search warrants were served at Deven's current and previous Fayetteville homes. The search for Blake and London intensified. In April of 2024, investigators made the discovery that transformed the investigation from a missing persons inquiry into something far more grave. Partial skeletal remains were recovered from the property. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Blake Deven and London Deven. Avantae Deven was arrested on June 26, 2024, and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of concealing a death, 1 count of kidnapping related to London's case, and multiple counts of felony child abuse connected to the abuse of Blake. The investigation that followed the arrest produced findings that investigators described as among the most extreme examples of prolonged child mistreatment in the state's recent history. Blake and London, authorities concluded, had been subjected to conditions of severe isolation, starvation, and abuse, conditions that investigators described as exposure to extreme forms of torture, abuse, and neglect. The children had, authorities believe, lost their lives due to the consequences of starvation and deprivation. Their remains had been subjected to a process designed to prevent their discovery, a process that investigators allege involved the use of a burn pit on the property to incinerate human remains. Court documents revealed that Deven had allegedly enlisted others, including one of the other adopted children, to help her obtain materials used to process the remains. An arrest warrant alleged that she forced a sibling of Blake's to purchase tools from a store for this purpose. And throughout this entire period, years after the children had passed, Avantae Deven had continued collecting state adoption financial assistance payments. The system that had placed Blake and London in her care had continued sending funds designated for their support, with no indication that either child was no longer alive. The case triggered a full governmental response. North Carolina lawmakers moved swiftly to strengthen oversight requirements for the state's foster care and adoption systems, introducing changes specifically designed to ensure that children placed with adoptive families could not simply vanish from the record. The case also became the subject of a WRL documentary titled Broken: Foster Care in North Carolina, which examined the systemic failures that allowed Blake and London's situations to go undetected for years. In March of 2026, a grand jury formally indicted Avantae Deven on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Later that month, the Cumberland County District Attorney's Office filed notice of its intention to seek the death penalty against her. In May of 2026, a special Superior Court judge ruled that the death penalty case could proceed. Avantae Deven is expected to go to trial in 2027. Blake Deven and London Deven were not nameless. They were not abstractions. They were children who had already faced the difficulty of being removed from their original homes by a system that was supposed to find them something better, who had been placed in the care of a woman the state believed could provide that better life, and who had instead encountered something that no child, in any system, anywhere, should ever have to endure. Their story is a story of systemic failure as much as it is a story of individual harm. And it is a story that North Carolina has committed, through law, through investigation, and through documentary accountability, to ensuring is never repeated. The foster care reform measures passed in the wake of the Deven case represent a direct legislative response to what happened to Blake and London. Their lives, in their ending, became the reason that the next child in a similar situation might have one more safeguard standing between them and harm. That is not justice, but it is something. Blake and London Deven deserve to be protected. They deserve the full promise of the new lives the adoption system was supposed to give them. And they deserved a world in which the people responsible for them were held fully accountable for every choice they made. If this story moved you, if you believe that the most vulnerable children in our systems deserve protection, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your engagement helps us reach more people and tell more stories. Share this video. Ring that notification bell. We are telling these stories so that the world cannot look away. Case 10. Christina Elizabeth Treadway, January 13, 2018, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. The last case in this documentary is different from the others. It is different not because the outcome is less tragic. The outcome is devastating. It is different because the full arc of events on January 13, 2018, does not lead us to a courtroom or a guilty plea or a sentence handed down by a judge. It leads us instead to a community memorial on Sebastiani Drive in Northwest Charlotte, where neighbors lit candles and wept for 2 children and for the woman who was, by every account from those who loved her most, in a kind of pain that no one around her fully understood until it was too late. Christina Elizabeth Treadway was 34 years old in January of 2018. She was a mother. She was a singer. She was, in the words of her own mother, someone who could walk into a room and make it light up. She had a YouTube channel where she showed off her talents and featured her children. She had plans to start her own business, to help women feel confident, to build something for her family. She also had, in the weeks and months before January 13th, been struggling with something deeply and quietly painful. Those who were closest to her have said that she had been experiencing depression, though those closest to her had also said they did not fully register the depth of it until after everything had already happened. 7-year-old Isaiah Miller was her son. He was described by his grandparents as all boy, a prankster, a kid full of energy and mischief, and the kind of life force that fills up whatever space he was in. 3-year-old Aaliyah Miller was her daughter. She was described as someone who had inherited her mother's love of beauty and presentation. A little girl who would ask her mother to do her makeup and then pose for photos, who was already beginning to discover who she was going to become. On the evening of January 13, 2018, on a Saturday, something inside Christina Treadway reached a point from which she could not find a way back. What happened in the home on Sebastiani Drive that evening, the precise sequence of events, the exact state of mind, the full weight of whatever brought Christina Treadway to that moment, is something that investigators, family members, and the Charlotte community have spent years trying to understand. The medical examiner's office, which released its findings in April of 2018, determined that both Isaiah and Aaliyah had lost their lives due to probable strangulation. Isaiah, the examiner noted, had been restrained at the wrists. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department officers received a call reporting a suicide late that Saturday afternoon. They responded to the Old Gum Branch Road bridge over Interstate 485. Christina Treadway had jumped from that bridge. She was found on the interstate below, and she was gone. Officers immediately went to the family home on Sebastiani Drive. When they forced entry, they found Isaiah and Aaliyah inside. Both children were transported to a local hospital, where they were pronounced gone. A neighbor who had seen the children playing outside that very day, riding their bicycles, playing on the porch, doing the entirely ordinary things that children do, said that nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. "I would see them pretty much every day," he said. Another neighbor, whose own children had been at the home for a playdate just hours before, said she simply could not find words. "I don't know what happened. I can't even begin to imagine why she would do something like this." Christina Treadway's parents, Al and Patricia Treadway, drove 46 hours from California to Charlotte after learning what had happened. In an interview with local media, they were still unable to fully process the reality of what they were being asked to absorb. "She was just a lovely person," Patricia Treadway said. "She was loved by so many people. She's never had a mental problem. We never had a problem with Christina in any shape or form with mental or depression or anything to do with depression at all." The contradiction between that statement, made by people who loved their daughter deeply, and the evidence of what had happened, reveals something profound and painful about how mental health crises often function. They can be invisible to those closest to the person experiencing them. They can exist in quiet, complete concealment, right up until the moment they cannot. Isaiah and Aaliyah's grandfather, Gregory Moore, spoke to the press as well. He said that he knew Christina had been dealing with some mental health challenges, that the family had tried to help her, and that she had been, in his words, in denial. He struggled to reconcile his grief for his grandchildren with the complicated grief of losing a family member whose final act he could not condone and could not understand. "It's hurtful. It's very hurtful," Moore said. "I try my best not to be angry with her, but it's hard not to be." The Northwest Charlotte community responded in the days that followed with candles and prayers, and the kind of collective mourning that happens when a tragedy is simply too large and too incomprehensible for any single family to carry alone. The memorial on Sebastiani Drive, with its small pink bike with training wheels and the slightly larger red and black bike still parked in the driveway, became a gathering point for a neighborhood trying to make sense of something that defied it. There are no criminal charges in this case. There is no defendant to hold accountable in a court of law. There is only a community left to grieve, a family shattered on both sides, and 2 children whose lives ended far too soon in circumstances that should never have reached that point. Mental health professionals who have studied cases involving harm to children by caregivers in psychological crisis consistently emphasize that access to mental health services, meaningful, affordable, destigmatized access, is among the most powerful tools available for preventing tragedies of this kind. When someone is struggling, the earlier they are able to connect with professional support, the more options exist for intervention before a crisis becomes irreversible. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Trained counselors are available around the clock, and they are there to help. If you believe someone you love is in immediate danger, please call 911. Isaiah Miller was 7 years old. Aaliyah Miller was 3 years old. They were beloved. They were remembered. They were pranksters and primpers and children full of life. and they deserved more time in this world than they received. Christina Treadway was a daughter, a sister, and a mother who, in the depths of a crisis no one around her fully saw coming, made choices that cannot be undone. Her story does not fit neatly into the categories this documentary has examined across its previous 9 cases. But it belongs here because the loss is real, and the children at the center of it are real, and the community that had to find a way to absorb what happened on that January evening in Charlotte deserved to have this story told with honesty, with complexity, and with care. The Northwest Charlotte community has not forgotten Isaiah and Aaliyah Miller. Their grandfather's words, "It's hurtful. It's very hurtful," are words that echo wherever people gather to remember 2 children who were here and then were not. Their names will not be erased. This documentary has examined 10 cases from across North Carolina. Cases of children who were failed by the adults responsible for their protection. Cases where systems missed warning signs. Cases where communities were left to grapple with losses they could not have anticipated. And cases where the justice system was called upon to hold accountable those who had caused irreparable harm. Each of these children had a name. Each had people who loved them. Each deserved far more than what they received. If this documentary has moved you, if the stories of Jelly, Trinity, Amora, Camila, Kingston, the children of Chartwell Court, Jamie, Jade, Dominique, Blake, London, Isaiah, and Aaliyah have stayed with you, then please carry them forward. Talk about them. Advocate for stronger child protection policies. Support the organizations doing this work in your community. And if you ever see something that doesn't look right where a child is concerned, please say something. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-422-4453. Calls can be made anonymously. A single call can save a life. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment below and let us know which case from this documentary stayed with you most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these stories. Every subscriber, every like, every share helps us continue this work and helps ensure that the children at the center of these cases are never forgotten. Like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you in the next episode.